If we could make our way to our seats, we'll get started shortly. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the last night of Senior Thesis. It's homey tonight, right? We're here. We've made it. You look at those three, and you just got three good kids over there. Let me tell you that. So we're excited. We're excited for the Thesis tonight, and so let's get it started. I think I've got Micah. You're introducing, correct? All right, let's go, buddy.
Everybody clap up for Micah.
Hello, my name is Micah Garcia, and I am honored, nay, privileged to introduce my sister Sela. She has been attending ACA since kindergarten, and she will attend TAMU-CC and will major in nursing. Today, she will be talking about Christian mental health care. So please help me welcome my sister, Sela Garcia.
Imagine a girl named Julie. She doesn't necessarily have faith in God and faces depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems. The world seems really dark around her. She doesn't want to do anything and has no light in her life. She wants to fight and do whatever she can so that her mind focuses on something satisfying so she can fill the hole in her life. She finds true believers and she just wants to argue and prove that God doesn't really exist. Eventually, she gets invited to dinner at a Christian's house. They invite her to church. She finally caves in and visits their church. It takes a few visits and discussions with the ministers of the church, but she finally has a light in her life. She has found something to focus on that actually fills the hole and takes her out of her depression and away from her anxious thoughts. She is now a believer in Christ. She attends church regularly and feels as if she's a new person and is able to discuss her past. Eventually, she will be able to show believers the faith and hope she's gained in Christ. This is a story of Christian mental health care. First things first, mental health is defined by Oxford Languages as a person's psychological and emotional well-being. Mental health can also be deemed as a lack of the good things in the Bible, such as love, joy, peace, and hope. There can also be good mental health, which is when someone understands how to cope with their issues. Mental health problems are often seen as anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. Others are obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD, eating disorders, substance abuse disorders, and more. Mental health affects everyone. It just affects everyone differently. It is just like physical health. When a person has the flu, they need to rest and take medicine and do things that ultimately help the issues. In the same way, when a person has depression or anxiety, they may take medications and need rest in order to feel better. It is even viewed the same as a disability. The Americans with Disability Act covers depression and anxiety, meaning that workplaces should accommodate an employee with psychiatric disabilities. Mental health issues can be considered a disability depending on severity, and unfortunately, mental health problems are more common than someone would think. Kathleen Kinney, a pharmacist and writer for Pharmacy Times, suggests most mental health conditions begin around the age of 14. Kinney lists some statistics, which include that depression affects 264 million people worldwide. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in people between the ages of 15 through 29, and there is fewer than one mental health professional for every 10,000 people globally. Mental health should be observed, even if others say it does not matter or they don't know what to do about it. It is not something people have control of completely, but it is something that they can overcome by God first, then family, friends, and if needed, therapy or medications. We must learn how to handle mental health properly in order for mankind to live out the life God has planned. In my speech, I will discuss how mental health has existed over time, how a person can care for their mental health, and I will address the stigma of mental health. Mental health has been pushed aside, but it is important for your health. Anxiety is defined as a mental condition characterized by excessive apprehensiveness about real or perceived threats, leading to avoidance behaviors and symptoms such as increased heart rate or muscle tension. Anxiety can be a cause of panic attacks and is often how someone feels when going to do something they're scared of. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley shows anxiety in the main character, Victor Frankenstein. Victor makes this creature he hopes to be perfect, but in the end, this creature becomes a monster. The monster causes Victor to have severe anxiety, making him unable to move and go anywhere for a long time. Depression, which is defined as a mental condition that negatively affects how a person feels, thinks, and acts, can be seen in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Both title characters faced a form of depression because they were unable to see each other. They wanted an escape from reality so they could be with each other, which ultimately ended in suicide. Bipolar disorder is defined as a mental condition where there can be manic and depressive episodes, which means someone can go from being really happy to suddenly not wanting to do anything. Similar to how, in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Dr. Jekyll represents the depressive side and Mr. Hyde represents the manic side. Before symptoms are displayed, there are changes that can be noticed. Kathleen Kinney suggests some of these changes include alcohol or drug abuse, changes in eating habits, sleeping patterns, and work performance, decreased interest in hygiene, disorganized thoughts, emotional extremes, feelings that last longer than usual, isolation, and loss of interest. Mental health has been handled incorrectly and has existed for ages. It has even been seen in the Bible and throughout history. In the Bible, Elijah is perceived to have depression, even when he served God as a prophet. In 1 Kings 19:4, Elijah prays to God and says, "I have had enough, Lord, take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." God then told Elijah to continue his mission, and the rest of the story is his recovery. God sent Elijah to his shelter, provided for him, and suggested Elijah take a nap, which made him feel better. After he prayed to God, Elijah remained faithful through all his trials and was able to overcome his depression and desire to die. The Psalms hold many verses from David that show him dealing with his own mental issues. Steve Sullivan, a chaplain for veterans, helps those who are depressed, have PTSD, and have other disorders. Sullivan was going through Psalms and saw these Psalms are chock full of David's cries to God. In writing these Psalms, David was relieved through communication with God. In Psalm 31, 9-10, David says, "Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye is wasted from grief, my soul and my body also, for my life is spent with sorrow and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my iniquity, and my bones waste away." David ultimately goes to God. Jesus may not be someone expected to have mental issues because he is a perfect being, but he did, just not in the way we think. In his book, Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering, Timothy Keller writes, "Jesus was a man of sorrows. Before Jesus went to the cross, he was anguished because of what he knew he had to do for us." In Matthew 26:38, he tells the sons of Zebedee, his soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Jesus, who was the most perfect being and was both human and God, faced mental anguish. Jesus was like us, human, a being who has both feelings and faces temptations. Mental anguish is something we must all face. It is okay to face grief and discouragement, but we must know that God is with us. As people overcome and deal with the mental hardship, people gain good mental health. The good mental health does not necessarily mean the person is automatically healed and will not face anything. It just means that a person is at a good point in their journey with mental health problems. Philippians 4:6-7 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." This verse shows that God will protect us and be there for us in the hard times that we must face. In facing mental health issues, a person needs to understand what to do and when to get professional help. First, the person should pray. Then they can talk to others about what they are facing. Taking a day off of work or school is another option. It is important to have a life-to-work balance, which helps to reduce stress and burnout and allows for someone to come back with more energy. Alternatively, therapy is available. Therapy is the professional help a person can seek when needed. It helps a person discuss and fully understand their mental health issues and how to cope with them. Mental health affects everyone. However, there is a stigma surrounding it. An article from McLean Hospital defines the stigma as an unfair mark of shame placed upon people with mental health issues, and one that people often place on themselves. This stigma occurs when an individual with some type of mental illness is viewed by the others or themselves in a negative light. The individual then believes that they are unworthy and they should be able to control their symptoms through their own will, ultimately affecting their ability to do anything about it. The mental health stigma can also impact both genders. McLean Hospital says, "Many societies expect men to be tough and to hide their emotions. This expectation means men are far less likely to seek help than women, but also have increased rates of depression and suicide. Society also expects women to be emotional, but not hysterically emotional. There are also standards for athletes that in reality cannot be met. If they have an issue, whether a physical injury or mental illness, they do not tend to tell others because it will make them look weak. The stigma is even more difficult in communities or cultural groups where people experience unique stressors. McLean Hospital says that within the Black community, men especially receive the message to deal with problems on their own, leading to greater symptoms and self-medicating solutions such as drugs or alcohol. McLean also says that within the Hispanic community, there tends to be a stigma that mental health is demonic, leading to misdiagnosis of the issues. Each culture has their own beliefs and values, which affect how a person reacts to their mental health issues. This stigma is even portrayed in the media. People with mental illness are portrayed as homicidal or psychopaths. However, the vast majority of people with mental illness are not dangerous, and these portrayals often leave out how someone ended up being depressed or suicidal. They do not show how to help when someone is struggling. The National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention suggests that the media conveys the complexity of suicide and portrays characters that live rather than die by suicide, as well as show grieving processes, give resources, and even show how a person can be a lifeline for someone. We can also reduce the stigma by educating ourselves, discussing unfair depictions, and interacting with those who experience mental illness. Several ways to stop the stigma are: number 1, don't let the stigma take over or prevent a person from getting the help needed. Number 2, talk to others and reach out to those that are trusted. Number 3, speak up and be respectful and be educated on the topic of mental health. Number 4, be mindful of the language used. And lastly, be respectful and notice insensitive media coverage. In my research, a few sources called mental health a sin, which is another result of the stigma on mental health. In the medieval ages, the church believed that mental illness was a punishment from God, and they would burn them at the stake. These ideas stopped during the Enlightenment, and a few institutions helped people face mental illness. Unfortunately, this stigmatization peaked in Nazi Germany, when many were murdered or sterilized for their mental illness. Wolf Rossler, a psychiatry professor in Switzerland, writes, "The stigmatization of mental illness is still an important societal problem. The general population is largely ignorant about this problem, and fear of the mentally ill remains prevalent. Although we no longer imprison, burn, or kill the mentally ill, as in the Middle Ages or in Nazi Germany, our social standards and attitudes are nonetheless unworthy of modern welfare states." The opposing side may also argue that mental health care is pointless. However, an experiment's results show that mental health matters because it affects everything. The experiment had 2 groups, one for treatment, using many different methods, such as music, animations, and journals, while the control group was left to care for themselves. Their conclusions were that treatment significantly affected the professional's mental health status. Things like depression, anxiety, job burnout, and other mental health problems directly affect a professional's normal work and life. If mental health is down, it is less likely work will be done due to lack of energy, confidence, and motivation. The other side may say that it's a punishment from God. However, mental illnesses are a result of the fall of man. It is a result of sin, but it is not a sin to have. In The Dark Night of the Soul, the reader goes through a poem by St. John of the Cross, which shows the path individuals must travel is filled with dark nights, which brings us to God. The goal is that after passing through these states, they would be able to arrive at the state of the perfect divine union of the soul with God. The book states how God purges the worldly things from the soul, causing what feels like a dry spell. After the dark night is faced, the believer is with God and feels him stronger than before. The believer is at peace from the worldly things and is with God and in his love. Mental illness can be God taking everything away that was protecting an individual and letting everything come at them in order for the person to draw near to him. Over time, mental illness may get better, but it is because God is there for the person and God has a plan for them. It must not be faced alone or through worldly things, such as drugs, alcohol, or people who will not lead to God. In conclusion, mental health is real. It is not a punishment from God, and it does affect you. Mental illness has existed for all of time and has gradually been understood. It is seen in the Bible, it has a medical field for it, and it has been stigmatized for years. People must know that in this fallen world, mental illness is something we have to face. Even Elijah, David, and Jesus faced some type of mental health issue. Society needs to learn to stop making up stereotypes of mentally ill people, and we need to know that mental health is less likely to be portrayed correctly and understood by certain cultures. We also need to understand that when people come against us and our well-being, they are following the devil's tactics and making people feel as if it is wrong for them to be mentally ill and causing them to fall for wrong solutions. We must follow God's will, which involves taking care of ourselves. 1 Corinthians 3:16-17 says, "Do you not know you are God's temple? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. For God's temple is holy, and you are that temple." This means that God will protect his people because they are his temple and sanctuary. We need to be the light in people's lives and invite others to church and hang out with them. God is waiting and will be there for eternity, while mental illness is of the world and will not be with us forever. Thank you.
Good job, Sela. Very, very thorough. So thorough to the point that in reading my question and then listening to you and looking at your slides, you actually answered it. So I'm gonna tweak it just a bit. My original question was basically addressing the fact that we need to approach mental health and treating mental health spiritually first. Through you mentioned prayer. So in extending that question, what other spiritual disciplines can we use to treat mental health?
Well, aside from prayer, I think we can also use like devotionals, like taking time in the morning or even after school or just in the middle of the day to read the Bible and just understand God's word, because it's not just about our communication with him, but it's also about what we know about him and what is revealed to us about him in the Bible. But there's also things we can do like serving others and stuff like that. So yeah, that's my answer.
No, that's okay. I will admit I'm putting you on the spot with this one, but that's because you did a good job answering my initial question, so good job.
Thank you.
Way to go, Sela. That was great. My question is similar to Mr. Smith's, but more as what is the church's role as a whole, the church's role in addressing mental health issues, and what are ways that the church can serve those with mental health issues?
I believe the church's role to help those with mental health issues is to support them, even if that means starting a support group within your church or within the community that you're leading. My grandpa, in fact, did start a support group for his church for bipolar people, and that lasted for about 20 years. But I mean, I think it was a great thing for the community because they were all able to come and discuss with a minister of the church about whatever they were facing, and they were able to know that they weren't alone. Can you repeat your question real quick?
Oh, no, yeah, I think you answered it pretty
Okay.
well. You're good. One more. What are the effects of social media usage and technology, just in general technology, on a person's mental health?
My research didn't exactly go into that, but I do know social media ultimately has negative effects because it makes people think about themselves negatively. It gives them self-image issues, causing them to be depressed and have anxiety about the things they're not doing or the things that other people are doing that they're not doing, and it just leads them to live a fake life and not address anything that they're really going through in the right way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good job, Sheila. As you know, my question was stolen. So it wasn't you. That's what happens when you've been married for 20 years. You have to coordinate. I know. Okay. We next year we know. Coordinate questions. All right. So I'm going to narrow it down then, I guess. what should, you know, we're seeing in the media a lot of high-profile mental health crimes. What is the Christian response to like how to deal with these mental health related crimes? Is there anything that we could that the church or the individual Christian ought to do in regards to that? I know that might throw you off a bit because it wasn't exactly what you had before, but
Could you possibly define what you mean by mental health
sure.
crimes?
So like after any kind of a school shooting or any kind of mass shooting event, there's always discussion of mental health. So does the church have a role in solving that problem?
Well, I would say they have a role in at least supporting the people affected by those problems because, like after a school shooting, as you brought up, everyone in the community is usually like they're hit hard because of what happened because it's usually in an elementary school or something, and so that means that all their children may be gone. So then they start facing a depression and grief, and I think the church just needs to be able to show their support in it, like their support for the families and the people affected by the crimes that were done. And I think they just need to do like outreaches when stuff like that happens to bring more people into the church so that way they know they're not going through something alone and that there's other people who are willing to help them and guide them through the process. So, yeah.
Good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now take a few minutes to get things tallied up, and then we'll introduce our next introducer. All right, if you could please start making your way back to your seats. Introducing our next speaker is Liz Chavez.
Hi, I'm Liz, and I'm happy to introduce my sister, Isabel. My sister, Isabel, has attended Annapolis from kinder all the way to right now, the end of her senior year, and will be attending TAMUCC in the fall. Attending TAMUCC. She is described by one of her teachers as being one of the best writers in the school because of her empathetic nature used in her writing to make her reader truly feel for her topic. Her thesis is A Desensitized Nation, an examination of the effects of violence on American society. Now let's welcome my sister, Isabel.
In ancient times, stories created by the Greeks and Romans were overtaken by the theme of violence. And because these myths were a reflection of the societal standards of the time, it can be inferred that violence was prevalent in these cultures. War, betrayal, and revenge are all constants in tales of Greek mythology. And since these stories and others like them remain popular in modern time, it is blatantly clear that violence is and always has been craved by the average person. For example, Augustine of Hippo talks about the experience of a man being enraptured by violence despite insisting he was above the desire to experience it. If you drag my body to that place and sit me down there, do not imagine you can turn my mind and my eyes to those spectacles. I shall be as one not there, and so I shall overcome both you and the games. He kept his eyes shut and forbade his mind to think about such fearful evils. A man fell in combat. A great roar from the entire crowd struck him with such vehemence that he was overcome by curiosity. Supposing himself strong enough to despise whatever he saw and to conquer it, he opened his eyes. As soon as he saw the blood, he at once drank in savagery and did not turn away. His eyes were riveted. He imbibed madness. He found delight in the murderous contest and was inebriated by bloodthirsty pressure. This is how Augustine describes the man's experience. Furthermore, during the late 19th century, there was a killer who was, and remains to this day, infamous for his crimes. Even at the time, the general public was fascinated by him. Operating in the Whitechapel district of London, Jack the Ripper's gruesome murders of at least 5 women captivated the public's attention and fueled a sense of fear and hysteria within them. As news of the killing spread, so did panic among the streets of Whitechapel, causing people to fear for their safety. And since the police were unable to apprehend the elusive killer, the public's hysteria only intensified, which led to widespread speculation and conspiracy theories. Newspapers sensationalized the crimes, publishing lurid details of the murders, while the authorities incessantly faced mounting pressures to bring the killer to justice. Nevertheless, the true identity of Jack the Ripper remains a mystery to this day, though his reign of terror did leave a lasting imprint on Victorian society, forever associating the name with the allure of unsolved mysteries that continues into modern time. This event proves how the general public do and always have loved violence and desire to indulge in it as much as possible. And this has been an apparent fact for much of human history. However, there is still something that makes violence absorbed by those in the past and those in the present different. Violence absorbed in the present day is all too easily accessible. With media as one of the most, arguably the single most, central thing in the modern person's life, and with violence being a key aspect of it, it certainly follows that violence will run rampant in people of modern society's minds. Furthermore, not only is violence everywhere you look nowadays, but because of its pervasiveness in the media, the majority of people have become desensitized to it, meaning it is now socially acceptable to indulge in these things, regardless of the genuinely graphic and disturbing nature of them. This has led to my choice of topic being on how American society has become desensitized due to the normalization and prevalence of depictions of violence in the media. One of the main outlets of the media is going to be TV shows and movies. Through adaptations, whether fictional or non-fictional, this avenue undoubtedly and consistently brings in an overwhelming amount of viewership when it belongs to the genre of crime and/or violence. Furthermore, streaming platforms make these series easily accessible, even going as far as to have their own section, television shows and movies all laid out for the convenience of anyone who's feeling like absorbing this kind of content any day of the week. In fact, most of the popular series on Netflix involve violence in some way, which seems to be the driving factor behind why people become intrigued by, then later hooked, and eventually consumed by this media. Violence is its own genre, and it seems that the majority of the time, the people behind these shows have vaguely good intentions, using the excuse of intending to bring awareness or that violence is simply not so bad, but they clearly crave mostly monetary gain, considering the never-ending influx of viewership. Squid Game is one of the most popular television shows out of the many on Netflix, reaching upwards of 1 billion hours of viewership. The series is about a group of people playing children's games turned deadly. Failure to complete certain tasks will end in players' deaths. These executions are often brutal and graphic, including people being shot in the head on camera, along with other excessively violent killings. This show is of course fiction, but how does that contrast to nonfiction programs that contain violence that is completely possible? Because at the end of the day, a lot of the things being portrayed in nonfiction programs, whether sensationalized or not, are based on factual events. Dahmer is a disturbingly popular series on Netflix. It is based on the crimes of serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, who was active in the late 70s through early 90s. He's infamous for his 17 victims being all male, many being children, and for his cannibalistic and necrophiliac-like tendencies. An insight on the nature of his crimes is this. On June 18, 1978, Dahmer, 18, lured also 18-year-old Stephen Hicks to his house under the pretense of access to alcohol. After Hicks rejected Dahmer's romantic advances, in a fit of rage, making this a crime of passion and of opportunity, he was bludgeoned and killed, after which Dahmer admits to committing necrophilia and later cutting up his body to dispose of it. Dahmer went on to have many other victims, eventually being apprehended, charged, convicted, and later killed in prison. Jeffrey Dahmer is someone who, even after death, has been extremely focused on in the true crime genre. In this series particularly, it is clear that justice for the victims is not the main goal. In fact, it would surprise anyone if that was a thought anywhere in the creators' minds, considering many loved ones of the victims have spoken out in the fact that they were not asked or even warned about the series' existence until it came out. One family described the show as re-traumatizing. Along with being unable to depict the gruesome details to the level they were in real life, the show arguably seeks to garner sympathy for the killer. Several pieces of media have been made about Dahmer, only giving more renown to a person responsible for such horrific crimes. Despite all of this, hearing about stories such as Dahmer's have led many people to become interested in, and some eventually coming to love learning about serial killers. And one genius way that people have found to profit off of this is by creating YouTube channels that are centered around true crime cases. YouTube content creators such as Eleanor Neal, Kendall Ray, and Bailey Sarian are some of the most popular in their field, a certain genre on their platform, which is true crime entertainment. The rise of true crime YouTubers has sparked significant controversy within both the true crime community and the broader public sphere. These channels are proof that crime sells, but at what cost? The ethics of centering content around true crime are controversial. Some would argue that it does more harm than good. While many content creators aim to provide informative and respectful coverage of criminal cases, others have been criticized for sensationalizing tragedies, exploiting victims for views and profit, and perpetuating harmful stereotypes and misinformation. Furthermore, the ethics of profiting from real-life tragedies and the potential impact on victims' families have been subjects of heated debate. Critics argue that some YouTubers prioritize entertainment value over journalistic integrity, sacrificing accuracy and sensitivity in pursuit of clicks and subscribers. Additionally, the blurring of boundaries between entertainment and journalism raises questions about accountability and responsibility in true crime storytelling. Real-life tragedies become our entertainment at the expense of its victims. The last avenue is video games. Participating in the violence offered in them takes the issue a step further in the wrong direction. It goes from watching violence to being in control of a simulated violence. In GTA, the Grand Theft Auto games, violence is a part of nearly every aspect of gameplay, reflecting the criminal underworld that players inhabit. From the moment the player assumes control of their character, they are thrust into a world where illicit activities are commonplace and conflict is inevitable. They can do anything they want with zero real-world consequences since, after all, it's just a game. Whether it's hijacking vehicles, engaging in shootouts with rival gang members, or participating in high-stakes heists, players are often presented with morally ambiguous choices that frequently involve the use of force. The violence in GTA games is portrayed with a level of realism that can be both immersive and shocking, with graphic depictions of gunfights, brutal beatings, and explosive confrontations. Additionally, the open-world nature of the games allows for emergent moments of chaos and mayhem as players interact with a dynamic environment and non-player characters. But what does it matter how involved we are, which avenue we explore that brings us on the path of violence? Why would anyone be willing to indulge in violence? There are many theories as to the reason why people find themselves so attracted to this type of media. The most likely answer is that the adrenaline rush satisfies the person, they go on to glorify it, leading others to easily accept indulging in it themselves, and the never-ending cycle continues. This unhealthy interest can lead to a distorted perception of reality. Moreover, some people may become emotionally invested in the lives and stories of notorious criminals, glorifying or even romanticizing their actions, which can be harmful and disrespectful to the victims and their families. Violence in the media is a complex and often debated topic, with arguments on both sides regarding its necessity and appropriateness. Gratuitous violence, especially when depicted in a sensationalized or glamorized manner, can desensitize audiences and perpetuate harmful stereotypes or behaviors. The American Academy of Family Physicians says, while multiple factors can lead to violent actions, a growing body of literature shows a strong association between the perpetration of violence and exposure to violence in media. While there are instances where it is certainly unnecessary and even harmful, there can be a time and place for violence in the media, particularly when it serves a purpose in storytelling or artistic expression. Thus, the consumption of violence does not always have to be a detriment to us. In certain contexts, violence can be used to convey important themes, explore the human condition, or highlight social issues. It can serve as a tool for commentary on real-world events or historical narratives, prompting reflection and critical thinking. It's essential for creators to consider the impact and intent behind the portrayal of violence in media, striving for a balance that respects the integrity of storytelling while also being mindful of its potential effects on viewers, particularly vulnerable audiences such as children or those with a history of trauma. In Christian writer C.S. Lewis' The Chronicles of Narnia, violence serves as a pivotal narrative element, illustrating themes of courage, sacrifice, and the battle between good and evil. However, Lewis never glorifies violence for its own sake. Rather, it is portrayed as a tool used for a purpose. Ultimately, while violence may have its place in certain narratives, its inclusion should be approached thoughtfully and responsibly. Reducing exposure to violent media can be achieved by implementing regulations and consciously managing our media intake. Setting limits on screen time and selecting age-appropriate content can mitigate the impact of violent imagery. Additionally, fostering a critical mindset towards media consumption and prioritizing alternative forms of entertainment and education can help create a healthier media environment. Lastly, promoting media literacy and encouraging discussions about the effects of violent media can empower individuals to make informed choices about their media consumption habits. There is, however, one last reason to avoid glorifying violence. The Bible has a clear stance on it. The Lord tests the righteous, but his soul hates the wicked and the one who loves violence. In conclusion, the pervasive exposure to violence in American media has undoubtedly contributed to desensitization among the population, manifesting in various behavioral and societal areas, with prolonged exposure to violent media content correlating with diminished emotional and empathetic responses, as well as an increased tolerance for aggression. This desensitization phenomenon extends across different media platforms, including television, social media, and video games, shaping attitudes, behaviors, and societal norms. While there are counter-arguments and critiques challenging the direct causal link between media violence and desensitization, the preponderance of evidence suggests a significant influence. Therefore, addressing desensitization requires a multifaceted approach involving media literacy education, responsible media practices, and potentially regulatory interventions. It's important for individuals to maintain a balanced perspective and set healthy boundaries when engaging with violent content, recognizing the importance of empathy, critical thinking, and self-care in navigating this complex and often dark subject matter. By fostering critical thinking skills and promoting awareness of the psychological impact of media content, society can mitigate the adverse effects of desensitization and cultivate a more empathetic and ultimately compassionate Christian culture. Thank you.
Good job, Bill.
Thank you.
Kind of convicting. I like my GTA. I've been playing that for a long time. So, throughout your thesis, you present many examples of violence in media and refer to the American Academy of Family Physicians to propose that there is a link between individuals who consume media, which glorifies violence, and then those same individuals go on to commit violent acts. However, when I read your thesis, I very quickly found an article by the American Psychological Association from March 2020 that basically said the opposite, that there's insufficient scientific evidence to support a causal link between violent media consumption, specifically video games is what this article was talking about, and then violent behavior in individuals. So at best, there's like competing sides within the medical community of it does cause it or it doesn't cause it. So we're having a hard time quantifying that. So with that, does that point to something deeper going on within us that drives our desire for this violence, which can't be quantified by research? And where would you say this deeper desire for violence might be rooted within us? And then how might we address it?
So I think the issue of what violence does to us and how it manifests in our actions is very complicated, and there's a lot of nuance there. I'm actually not of the opinion that every single person who experiences even a lot of violence is going to go on to be violent. There's the nature versus nurture argument. A lot of people who are violent are either brought up a certain way, and not that it's an excuse, but it might lead to some clarification on why they are the way they are. And some people are just born that way. It's another kind of confusing argument that's there. I think that deep down, the love of violence is a sin, and we're all sinners. It's the way we love to lie rather than to tell the truth. There's a lot of sins that we indulge in, the way that we indulge in violence, because it's easier, it's more fun. But doing what we normally do and praying to God and those type of things that we use for any other sin, I think are good in shaping our mind and our heart based off of how much violence that we're being subjected to. That'd be my answer.
Very good, thank you.
Very good job, Bill. So my question is, you can't laugh. I'm gonna laugh. My question is, with the so in your thesis, you're talking about how media makes things more violent, but my question took a different kind of look at it. Like when we see what's going on with Israel and the portrayal of the violence, in my opinion, is causing an outrage against justifiable violence. Did you discuss or find anything in your research related to that, or do you have an opinion on it based on your research?
Not much on that. I would say that maybe it's the way that we watch documentaries or movies that are based on World War I or World War II. There's a lot of violence in those, as you know. And I think that if it's necessary, it can be educational. So I think that it does have a place in the media.
All right, thank you, Bill.
Great job. Thank you. Very important topic. My question is, does implementing government restrictions or regulations on entertainment content impede on the right to free speech, as well as an American's freedom to choose what to consume? And also, where do we draw the line on what we regulate? How do we create that line, and where do we start regulating?
So on the regulations, I think that a lot of it should be personal to us. I don't think that there should be government regulations. Although if there's something in the media that, again, is violent for the sake of violence and gratuitous, I think that that's something that shouldn't be allowed to be made, like how there's ratings on movies and TV shows and things. But I think a lot of it is parents should regulate what their children are paying attention to, as well as you get older, regulate yourself on the way you've been known to respond to violence that you're seeing in the media. You should know how much it's going to affect you and be able to put regulations based off of that.
Very good. I'm going to continue then on that train of thought. And you do touch on what I'm about to ask you. I just want you to expand on it a little bit. Many adult Christians watch shows in movies like Game of Thrones, and I'm talking specifically adults here. Game of Thrones, Walking Dead, Breaking Bad, the Saw movies, those types of movies. You do give things that people can do to guard themselves from violent content. So again, where do Christian adults draw the line in what is acceptable violence and which isn't?
I think there's a line that needs to be drawn, and I'm actually guilty of this myself. Like, I love the Saw movies, and I kind of have to think to myself, why am I watching? Like, why do I love it? It's, again, the love of violence is something that we need to examine within ourselves and realize that the Bible talks about it for a reason. clearly like it's something that can do harm to us. And it's kind of what I said in your first question, just thinking about what it does to us, what mental space it's putting us in. Things that we are consuming need to lead us to a good place, not a bad place, not a dark place.
My last question, and it's similar to Mr. Smith's question. Again, you've already touched on this. I just want to get some clarity here. You say quite a bit that people will clearly love or crave violence. But just because someone indulges in something doesn't necessarily mean that they love it or crave it. I think of a heroin addict. Yes, they do crave heroin, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they love it. Likewise, people who slow down to see a pretty brutal car accident are not really craving the accident before it happens. So can you expand on why you're using the word love and crave when you're talking about our relationship with violence?
I think that, again, there's a line. Some people may crave it, and a lot of people probably go as far as to love it, and I think that comes from desensitization, because once you're desensitized to violence, you are disconnected from seeing it as a real-world situation, and so it's something that you can grow to love. It's something that you can claim you have an interest in and subscribe the word love to that, and so, yeah, that's kind of my answer.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you very much, Belle. We're going to take a few moments to get things tallied up, and then we'll have our final speaker. All right, if you could, please start making your way back to your seats. We're ready to continue. just get a paper. Not yet, but you're doing it, right? You're doing it? Okay. Introducing our last but not least speaker is Jasenia.
Hi, my name is Jasenia Ford, and I am a sophomore here at Annapolis. And this year, I have the honor of introducing Joshua Cavazos. He is my older cousin that I dearly look up to. He has always done the most for me, his family, and even his teammates on the court and on the field. He has accomplished so much here at Annapolis and is ready to step into a new journey in the fall. Josh will be attending Texas A&M Corpus Christi and will be majoring in biology. His senior thesis topic is Human Trafficking, Modern Day Slavery. So please help me welcome Josh to the stage.
Imagine that as your childhood has just seemingly begun, a time where all you can hope for was nothing short of boundless possibility and imagination, you were faced with the hard-hitting reality that things are going to be different. That from here on out, you'd be subject to doing certain things just because you were told that it was the only way, or just because you had to. Training specialist and traffic survivor Liz Williamson from the nonprofit organization Truckers Against Trafficking has her own story to share regarding her experience and how life was different for her. Little did she know that 29 years ago, on the day of her 6th birthday, she would fall victim to human trafficking for what seemed like a lifetime. For 17 years, about as long, if not longer, than some of us have even been alive, she would fall victim to the crime of human sex trafficking. Fast forward to today, and Liz, along with the help of the TAT organization, has been working by giving testimony throughout the nation and reaching out to law enforcement and changing the lives of thousands of victims. For her, the long and difficult path to recovery hasn't been easy, but now she's made it known that today is a good day. It seems as though this story has a happy ending, right? Well, like Liz, there are parts of one's life that just won't go away. You see, I believe the reason why her story is even more heartbreaking is not because she was lied to or abducted. Instead, it was because of her very own mother, all for the sake of monetary benefit. Ever since her 6th birthday, she was told the same thing by her mother for 11 years: to smile, look pretty, and do whatever you're told if you love me. At the age of 18, she ran away from her family, but it wasn't until she was 23 years old, 5 whole years afterward, that she would be freed completely from the bondage of trafficking entirely. Unfortunately, she, along with countless amounts of men, women, and children, are a part of the same story. Now, any account of human trafficking has the same parts: the perpetrators, the means, the victims, the intention, and so on and so forth. When it pertains to this issue, the majority of people may say, "Why is this happening?" or "That's so sad." After today, I'd like to leave you with 2 important things: what human trafficking is, and 2, why we really ought to care. So, what exactly is human trafficking? Human trafficking, otherwise known as trafficking of persons, is the deliberate persuading, forcing, or compelling of persons against their will with the intention of exploitation, and in almost every case, profit. Profit can consist of many things such as money, pleasure, subjection, etc., etc. In other words, human trafficking is the illegal exploitation of an individual by forceful and subtle means. Now, there are 3 predominant types of human trafficking, such as human sex trafficking, which consists of about 79% of trafficking in total, labor trafficking with up to 18%, and the other portion including various sorts of domestic servitude, forced marriages, and organ harvesting. Now, the term human trafficking is classified today as a modern form of slavery. However, the 2 terms, slavery and trafficking, are viewed to be synonymous. Since the fall of man in the Garden of Eden, sin has been coexistent with the very idea of human existence. When sin entered the world, it would only be a matter of time before slavery as a product would come into fruition. Augustine speaks about this form of slavery as a particular consequence as a result of our lusts and our vices. He refers to what he calls the lust of mastery in his own work, The City of God Against the Pagans. In this, he alludes to this nature, this somewhat inherent desire to master yourself over another. I can speak for all of us when I say that we've all had the desire to master yourself over one another. It's whenever the kindergarten teacher has to deal with little Johnny whenever he suddenly shouts at playtime, "That's mine," or "I had it first." Hopefully this time, little Johnny would finally understand the infamous words, "Sharing is caring." Similarly enough, a man by the name of Spinoza reacts to the question of human bondage as the condition of men enslaved to the tyranny of their passions. It's an overwhelming disorder over all of mankind. It seems quite paradoxical, doesn't it? When you master over others, like your classmates, co-workers, siblings, we're appealing to the weakness of ourselves, even though we're supposed to be mastering over them. We are mastering over them. What is it that both Augustine and Spinoza are hinting towards here? The simple answer is the presence of sin in our lives. The lust of mastery or human bondage that we face in this situation is substituting ourselves over others and even God himself. This is exactly what happened in the garden, as I mentioned earlier. The serpent said, "You will surely not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing God and evil." Many years later, in 1865, the United States Congress inevitably passed and ratified the 13th Amendment, saying this: "Neither slavery or involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been fully convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." Not even a century later, in 1948, the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, stating that all forms of slavery or slave trade would be prohibited. At this point in time, slavery had seemed to be quite general, casting a wide net for something that had always been an issue. The abolition of legal slavery would seem to be praiseworthy, or should be praiseworthy. However, up until this point, the term trafficking hadn't been recognized as a problem itself. It wouldn't be until the year 2000 where the first comprehensive law would be made directly addressing trafficking. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act, or the TVPA. This very act has served to be the landmark by equipping the government with the adequate response both domestically and internationally. The framework of this act is based on what is called the 3P approach. Protection. Protection is the victim-based approach to this modern issue by acting as a living resource and aid to the victims. As an effective vessel, services will include immediate and long-term servitude or support, intensive case management, housing, food, medical care, legal assistance, and access to education, vocational opportunities, and much, much more. Secondly, there's prevention. The method or prevention doesn't only provide support locally, rather it sheds light on the global problem of human trafficking. In order to strategically deconstruct the issue as a whole, the main focus must be to attack the tactics of the traffickers themselves. Once we begin to understand these tactics, we can then move forward, reaching out to all the sectors of society, whether it be public or private, and embark on implementing strategies to combat human trafficking. Communities being educated to those strategies can look to have a better response to that threat. Other actions of prevention include the enforcement of new laws, prohibiting any room for exploitation or vulnerability. Example of this may include minor labor laws, including the supervision of recruitment agencies or upholding a certain instilled organization policy, the reducing of commercial sex demand, and many others to come. Given enough time, we experience, opportunities for further prevention are imminent just as long as we are ignorant. Lastly, prosecution. The importance of effective and proper action of courts and law enforcement cannot be emphasized enough. The Trafficking Victims Prevention Act highlights the the need for consistent and serious criminal justice responses to human trafficking cases. This will be carried out by holding perpetrators accountable and providing court-ordered restitution or compensation for these victims. Additionally, all cases of human trafficking can be broken down in what's called the AMP model. This model consists of 3 parts: the acts, the means, and the purpose. The act of human trafficking is defined as the harboring, kidnapping, or recruitment of a person. The means are the ways in which any criminal or organized party retains control over the victim or the victims. Example of this can include harm, the threatening of others, withholding of pay, etc., etc. And lastly, there's the purpose, or the why. Why did they commit this crime, or for what reason? It's important to note that this form of crime can easily be confused with other crimes, such as human smuggling or migration. Human smuggling is the arrangement of a service or an individual or a group deliberately seeking illegal transportation into another country. Meanwhile, human trafficking is the exploitation of an individual or a group of people for a certain purpose. In other words, human trafficking is based on human exploitation, while smuggling is based on legal transportation. Another misconception is the relationship between human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking, and prostitution. Prostitution differs from trafficking because it's the exchange of sexual services for the money, goods, or desired outcome. The primary difference between the two is the element of consent. A sex worker or prostitute has presented active consent or deliberate intention, rather than one who's trafficked or coerced. Now, this doesn't mean that human smuggling or migration or prostitution aren't tied to the crime of human trafficking. In fact, many cases of these are due to migration, or many cases of human trafficking are due to these crimes. Yes, human trafficking is awful, and yes, we ought to try to prevent it at all costs. But many may still ask, well, how does this pertain to me? I'd like to go back to our story earlier with our friend Liz Williamson. As a trafficking victim, to her it seemed impossible to seek for help. Even when she made attempts to tell others her condition, either her mother was dishonest about the claim, saying she was quite a promiscuous child, or those people that she would seek wouldn't help her just because they didn't want to get involved. Now, why would someone not want to help someone who is being trafficked? Liz writes, "It's really hard for people to hear this because for most of us, we think human trafficking is something that happens far away and can't touch the people that we love. People don't want to confront that. There's something about the sense of discomfort or uneasiness when it comes to a situation or whenever we talk about certain topics. Why are we uneasy about discussing hard things? In this case, either we fear confrontation, we aren't certain of how to deal with matters like these, or we suppose that someone else should handle it because we might not be the right person. In the event that you're out in the real world and genuinely notice something, don't stand by or push it aside out of unpleasantness. There is something that can be done. On the other hand, it's difficult to understand how these things can happen if we just don't see them. Right now, if you were to look up human trafficking on the internet, what would you see? You would come across hundreds of images and representations of these men, women, and children everywhere. And these images, what do they look like? Well, they're either bound up with tape, they're either bound up with rope, silenced with duct tape over their mouths, or clearly recognizable as someone who would need help. It seems as though it's only these blatant, can't-miss signs that we're only looking for, when in reality, they're all around us. It's right under our noses, and we don't even realize it. Liz also writes, "I think traffickers are hoping that we remain naive to their tactics so that they can continue to make money in the way that they do. If we just train people to see what they need to look for, we could potentially have an opportunity to save a life." Naivety. It's our naivety that gets the best of us. Not only are most of us not even aware of how or when to deal with these things, but we don't even know what to look for. Every year, more than 40 million people are trafficked, with each of those being trafficked ranging in financial cost or monetary value. The ordinary trafficker can make anywhere up to $50,000 when it comes to just one trafficked victim. Now, 40 million people, that's a lot. In fact, just by looking at sex trafficking alone, more than 50% of all sex trafficking is contained in the United States. If this is truly serious, if this is truly a serious and widespread issue, then why is it among one of the most rampant crimes in the United States or in the world? You see, we have to understand when we look for these criminals, these types of people, they disguise themselves and they disappear. They morph into a neighbor, the nice lady down the street, the businessman, the coach, the family friend. They, along with those who are being trafficked, are all around us. We just have no idea. Last summer, I had the opportunity to attend a showing of the quite famous film, Sound of Freedom, starring the well-known actor by the name of Jim Caviezel. Among those who were weeping and crying, I had left the theater with a new outlook on how many things we fail to realize, or just how big things really are. Going back to the question of why should we care, we as Christians are called to be empathetic and compassionate towards one another, facing social issues like this head on. Our responsibility as a whole, as children of God, is to hold in not only acknowledging, our responsibility as a whole, as children of God, is held in not only acknowledging this issue, but also actively combating it. We should be equipped to embody God's ultimate plan in restoring those who are His, and to spread God's loving and selfless message in the gospel. The best chance we have to fight is to remain in the day-to-day battle, not just in prayer and thought, but vigilance and unwavering commitment to those who need help, those in other countries and institutions like that of the TAT nonprofit organization, saying that God's children are not for sale. Thank you.
Good job, Josh. Very gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching topic.
Thank you.
So my first question to you is I'd like for you to explore the nuances and complexities of the border crisis, just because it's probably the most tangible thing of human trafficking to us here in South Texas. Can this issue be solved simply by the erection of a wall? And if not, what other policies or things can be implemented to stem this issue?
So you meant by what of the wall? Sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Sorry, say that again.
So you said, how can we solve this by, you said something about the wall.
Yeah, so can building a wall in and of itself solve this issue? Is the totality of solving this bigger than that? And if so, what else can go into solving that human trafficking crisis at the border?
So there's been a lot of issues. I know we had a congressman come up earlier this year and talk about how difficult and how complex the border situation is. And although we're very close to the border and we experience a lot of these issues, we do still have to recognize that it is a worldwide issue. And just walling up the edge of the nation isn't just going to solve everything. The fact that trafficking is tied in so much with cartels and the drug cartels, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's really difficult to try to combat these things whenever you have so many people behind it, whether it be hotels, congressmen, really, or any other organizations that we just wouldn't suspect to have that sort of play in that. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. My second question is that the other side in this conversation would have us believe that sex work is a legitimate business. So what I mean by that is everything from pornography to prostitution. Why is this not true?
That it's not a successful
It's
business.
not a legitimate business.
It's not a legitimate business. I would say that the reason why people would say that it's a legitimate business is because really it's quite profitable. For the traffickers, now technology is so advanced that they don't even have to go anywhere or transport any of the victims anywhere. They could just take videos like pornography, and it just becomes more accessible to other people. And you said can you repeat your question?
Yeah, so my question is why is it not true that that's a legitimate business?
I'd say it's not true because I think I'd say most of that, like all of the work that's gone into that, is very, very hidden, and it's like underneath all of our noses, like I had said. And to notice that stuff, it's not a lot of people do, and that's why it shouldn't be considered as a normal business or whatever you said.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, you mentioned Sound of Freedom, excellent movie. So that movie recounts the actions of Tim Ballard, and he kind of walks the line between legitimate law enforcement and vigilantism. And so my question to you, is that are his vigilante actions justified by their ends? Like, do the ends justify the means? Or is this better left up to law enforcement alone?
I'd say part of my thesis, I'd hope, would come out to say that although law enforcement does have a big role in this, that we do have our part to say, but what was his name again? It's a true story.
Tim Ballard.
Tim Ballard.
Ballard. B-A-L-L-A-R-D.
I'm not gonna pull a Tim Ballard tomorrow and go into the cartels and save people. I mean, that'd be pretty intense thing. But when it comes to that, I think it depends on your own situation and what you can control. That true story, based on, Sound of Freedom, that true story was very heroic and very, very uplifting. And so I guess that doesn't minimize, like, we don't have to do things like that in order to help the cause. And so, like I said, we can do other things like nourish the people that are in the church, those who have been affected, and again, educate other people about human trafficking, because not a lot of people even realize that that's a big issue. So, that's it.
Great, thank you very much.
Very good job. Trafficking often has us think of the girls and women who are victims of trafficking, but men can also be victims of trafficking in many ways. One way is that voices like Andrew Tate, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with who he is.
I'm familiar.
Yes, so he actually has an online course that teaches men how to manipulate women to sell themselves online as webcam girls. So you have voices like him, but you also have the prevalence of pornography that often creates in a man a desensitization against the brutality of women, or against women. So how can men specifically guard themselves and educate themselves against these voices, pornography, those types of things that manipulate and coerce them to view women as objects and to actually victimize women?
So I'd say, yeah, that's a lot of people. I know a lot of people they know Andrew Tate and all he's done. Oftentimes when you hear about pornography or trafficking, really, you think about young women, older women, or women in general, how they are being victimized whenever it's actually both men and women, older men, older, where it varies in age. And so I'd say that I know I've been told a lot by my own mother that I should stay away. I know it's not just stranger danger whenever there's a lot more to that. And when it comes to what a man can do to guard himself, sorry, I lost my thought. Can you restate the last part of the question?
So what can men specifically do to guard themselves from, it's really, they become victims as well of this when they victimize women.
So it seems like they might be tied to this one crime. I'd say that in order to guard themselves, it would help for them to, again, I'd say there's a big pornographic crisis in America today, and the way how it affects all of us, it's horrible. And so the way how that would affect us, and really it's such a widespread issue that bringing it up in churches and talking about it openly is is such an important thing. That's why I said, why are we afraid to talk about certain things whenever things like pornography or human trafficking is just really all around us. So I think that's what you're asking. So.
And you also just answered my second question, so I'll hand it over to Mr. Prothro.
Good job, Josh. What we're talking about really is like the image of God and the way that our society is distorting it and using it as a hedonistic tool. So, you know, as we think about addressing it, it's been talked about being addressed from a state perspective and an individual perspective, but, you know, what could the church do to bring back into focus in society what the idea Imago Dei means?
So, like I said, human trafficking wasn't really considered to be a crime itself, like apart from slavery, until about the year 2000. And so I think as far as the church goes, I've read a lot of stories when it comes to the church and them appealing to people who have been trafficked. Really quickly, one story, there was this one girl that was trafficked by her own family, and she came to the church for restitution and for just rehabilitation. And I think one part of whatever the elders told her, they mentioned the fact that Jesus, whenever he was on his way to the cross, he was stripped of all of his clothes. And so that really appealed to her. And so just the whole point of just the gospel and what Jesus has gone through and what the fact that he suffered everything that we did, that can really pinpoint what other people have gone through. And so not only that, but we can also educate other people whenever it comes to human trafficking, the sheer direness of what it all entails. And again, we can also reach out to organizations and other things too. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all for coming out. One more clap for these guys. Good job, everybody. God bless you. Have a wonderful night.